All right, listen up. You ever notice how in football there are players who are good, there are players who are great, and then there are those rare freaks of nature who make you question if they're even from this planet? That's what we're talking about today. Two guys who didn't just play the game, they bent it, shaped it, made it feel like you were watching something bigger than sport. Zidane and Iniesta. And here's the crazy part, they couldn't be more different. One was a magician, the other a ghost. One lit up the biggest stages with fireworks. The other rewrote history without making a sound. And that's the hook right there. Who's the real midfield genius? Because this isn't just stats and trophies. This is philosophy. This is art. This is about the kind of football that sticks in your soul long after the match is over. So buckle up, man, because once you start pulling on this thread, you're not just watching highlights. You're stepping into the very definition of genius. All right, check this out. When you really sit down and compare the playing styles of Zidane and Iniesta, you're talking about two guys who almost look like they're playing the same sport in completely different universes, man. Like Zidane was this towering figure, 6'1", broad shoulder, just this presence on the field where defenders almost froze because they knew one touch from him could spin the whole game on its head. And he had that glide, that slow motion elegance where it looked like the game was being played at half speed just for him. He'd bring the ball down with his chest like it was glued there, roll it with the sole of his boot, and then boom, hit a pass that cut open a defense like a scalpel. And his signature move, that roulette turn, it wasn't just skill, it was intimidation. Like he was saying, I'm going to spin right past you and there's nothing you can do about it. And you felt that aura, man, that sense that every time he touched the ball, the crowd inhaled, waiting for something impossible. But then you flip over to Iniesta and it's the total opposite vibe. He didn't look imposing at all. He looked like a regular guy you'd pass on the street, pale, quiet, unassuming, but once he had the ball at his feet, it was like the whole pitch bent around him. He lived in these microscopic spaces where normal players pan, and he just slipped through them like smoke. You couldn't get the ball off him because he never touched it too long. 1-2s, little give and goes, body feints that didn't even look like tricks, just shifts of weight that sent world-class defenders the wrong way. And what's wild is he made football look like it didn't need force, didn't need flash. It was pure intelligence, pure rhythm, like a jazz musician improvising, constant flow. And he had this insane ability to always pick the perfect option, never too much, never too little, just the right pass at the right time, which sounds simple, but when the whole world is pressing, the stadium is roaring, and millions are watching, that calm is terrifying. And what's crazy is these two styles reflect two philosophies of football genius. Zidane's was about domination, like he could single-handedly impose his will, grab the game by the throat and say, this is mine. And Iniesta's was about invisibility, about dissolving into the fabric of a team until suddenly you realize everything good that happened went through him. That's why you could argue all day about who was greater, because one was a storm and the other was the breeze, but both left you sitting there eyes wide going, how the hell is this guy even human? Man, if you really want to talk about big game impact, that's where Zidane and Iniesta almost start to feel like mythological creatures, like they weren't just athletes, they were built for those moments where the whole planet is watching. And with Zidane, it's insane because you look back at 1998 World Cup final, France against Brazil, the biggest stage imaginable. And here's this guy who just rises above everything, scores 2 goals with his head, both off corners, like he just decided, yeah, I'm going to own this final. And he does it with this calm, collected swagger. And then fast forward to Real Madrid against Bayer Leverkusen, and he scores that volley, man, that left foot strike that feels like something out of a video game, one of the most iconic goals in football history. And then even in 2006, when most players are winding down, Zidane drags France to another World Cup final, dominating Brazil, destroying midfielders half his age. And even though it ended with that infamous headbutt, people forget he was named player of the tournament. He was literally dictating the whole World Cup. And that's the thing with him. When the lights were brightest, when the world tuned, he never hid. He elevated. Like a heavyweight fighter who saves his best punch for the title bout. But then you look at Iniesta and it's a whole different kind of clutch gene, because this guy, he didn't have the Hollywood-style aura of Zidane. He had this almost ninja-like presence. You'd barely notice him through most of the game, and then suddenly, bang, he's carved up your defense. And nothing says big game impact like scoring the winning goal in a World Cup final. 2010, Spain versus Netherlands, extra time, tension at 100%. And Iniesta just calmly buries that goal. Literally changed the course of football history, gave Spain their first ever World Cup. And that's not even mentioning his performances in Euro 2008 and 2012, where he was the engine behind one of the most dominant international teams we've ever seen, constantly showing up in final, constantly delivering when it mattered. Or those El Clásicos where he'd walk into the Bernabeu, a hostile crowd, all that pressure, and just tear Real Madrid apart with his passing and movement. And the wild part is he did it without showboating, without screaming for attention. It was surgical. It was like the bigger the stage, the more invisible he became until suddenly he strikes and you realize he's been the difference the whole time. So when you line these guys up in terms of big game moments, Zidane was the guy who set the stage on fire with brilliance you could replay forever. And Iniesta was the guy who quietly wrote the script of history with the most decisive touches you could ever imagine. You know what's fascinating when you talk about leadership and aura with Zidane and Iniesta? It's like comparing two completely different forms of gravity, because Zidane had this raw magnetic presence, the kind of guy who just walked onto the pitch and everyone around him instantly elevated, not because he shouted or screamed or tried to dominate the locker room with words, but because his very existence demanded respect. He had that look in his eyes, that calm yet dangerous vibe, like a fighter who doesn't talk trash, but you know if he steps in the cage, you're in deep trouble. And that's how teammates and opponents saw him. He was elegance and menace rolled into one, this demanding figure who could slow the game down with a single touch. And people followed him because they felt protected. They felt like as long as Zidane was there, they had a shot. And when you look at moments like leading France to a World Cup, dragging them to a final 8 years later, even as a manager walking into Real Madrid and suddenly winning 3 Champions League titles in a row, that aura carried over, because it wasn't just what he did on the ball, it was the way he carried himself, this cool stoic energy that made chaos feel under control. Now compare that to Iniesta, and it's the complete opposite, but equally powerful, because Iniesta was never the loudest guy. He wasn't the captain in the traditional sense. He didn't need to bark orders. His leadership was almost invisible. It came from humility, from being the guy who always sacrificed for the team, always made the right choice, always played like winning mattered more than glory, and that quiet consistency turned him into the spiritual leader of Barcelona and Spain. Teammates would talk about how just having him on the pitch gave them calm, like a stabilizing force, because he embodied trust. And when you think about aura in his case, it wasn't this big towering intimidation like Zidane. It was this deep human connection. People loved him, respected him. Opponents even applauded him off the pitch because they felt his genius, but also his humility. And that's a rare kind of aura, man. It's not fear-based, it's respect-based. And in some ways, that's even stronger, because you're not following him out of, you're following him because you believe in him. So you had Zidane, who was like this mythic warrior, almost untouchable, and Iniesta, who was like the soul of a team, quietly leading without ever asking for the spot. Two completely different versions of leadership, but both so damn effective that you can argue all day which is more powerful, the fear and magnetism of Zidane or the trust and humility of Iniesta. When you dive into trophies and legacy with Zidane and Iniesta, it's like you're staring at two different blueprints for greatness, because Zidane had this career that felt like a movie script. He wins the World Cup with France in '98, scoring twice in the final, wins the Euros, and then goes on to deliver one of the most iconic Champions League goals of all time with that volley for Real Madrid in 2002, and he tops it off by winning the Ballon d'Or. So his legacy feels almost larger than life, like a highlight reel burned into football history. And the crazy part is, even the controversies, even that headbutt in 2006 became part of his legend, because it showed he was this intense, fiery character who played on the edge. And yet despite that, or maybe because of it, his aura only grew. He's remembered as a football god, not just by fans, but by players who idolized him. Now, on the other hand, Iniesta's trophy cabinet is absurd, like borderline unfair. Multiple Champions Leagues, a ridiculous amount of La Liga titles, back-to-back European championships in 2008 and 2012. And of course the Holy Grail, the 2010 World Cup, where he scored the winning goal in the final. And the wild part is, despite all of that, despite being the central figure in arguably the greatest club and international team ever, he never won a Ballon d'Or, which blows people's mind, because if legacy was just about medals and stats, he'd be right up there. But Iniesta's legacy is more about how he redefined the game, how he became the embodiment of tiki-taka, how he made simplicity look divine. And his peers, guys like Xavi, Messi, even opponents, would call him the best they ever played with. And that's telling you something. So where Zidane's legacy feels like it's carved in stone, this immortal figure who gave the world iconic moments, Iniesta's legacy feels more like it's etched into the fabric of football. It's less about one man's highlights, and more about how he changed the way teams played, how he inspired a generation of midfielders to focus on intelligence and movement instead of just flash. So you've got Zidane, whose trophy count and Ballon d'Or seal him as a certified legend, and Iniesta, whose insane collection of team success and unforgettable contributions make him one of the most respected players ever. And the debate comes down to this question of what matters more to legacy. Is it the individual recognition and cinematic brilliance of a guy like Zidane, or is it the overwhelming consistency and game-shaping influence of a guy like Iniesta? Because when you look at their trophy rooms and what they left behind,
you realize both wrote their names in history just with completely different pen. When you talk about the philosophy of genius with Zidane and Iniesta, man, it's like you're not even talking about football anymore. You're talking about two different interpretations of art. Like Zidane's genius was rooted in moments, these flashes of pure brilliance that could flip a game upside down in a second. And it was almost theatrical, like he knew the world was watching and he'd deliver something so smooth, so outrageous, that it instantly became immortal, whether it was a roulette in the middle of the perfectly weighted pass or that insane Champions League final volley. His genius was about the spectacular, about reminding you that football is entertainment, that it's supposed to make you stand up and scream, "Holy shit, did you see that?" But Iniesta, his genius was like the opposite. It wasn't about highlight reels, it was about invisibility, about mastery. So subtle you almost missed it until you realized he'd been pulling the strings the entire time. His philosophy was that the game isn't won by one magical act, but by hundreds of perfect decisions strung together, every pass, every angle calculated to create harmony, like jazz, improvisational but precise. And that's why teammates called him the soul of their teams, because he wasn't trying to dominate the spotlight, he was trying to make the whole collective breathe in rhythm. That's a completely different way of thinking about genius. It's not about look at me, it's about watch how everything works when I'm here. And the crazy thing is, both philosophies create the same result. They both bend the game in their favor. Zidane bending it with shock and awe, Iniesta bending it with flow and inevitability. And it makes you ask, what really defines genius? Is it those individual explosions of magic that get replayed forever? Or is it the invisible hand that turns chaos into order without anyone noticing until it's too late? Because Zidane made you believe in miracles. He made football look divine, like the gods gave him this gift. And Iniesta made you believe in human perfection, like a regular-looking guy who just understood the game at a level no one else could. So when you break down their philosophy, one is fire, the other is water. One dazzles you with brilliance, the other drowns you in inevitability. And that's why the debate is so fascinating, because it's not just about who was better, it's about what kind of genius you value more, the kind that blows your mind in a heartbeat or the kind that quietly controls your heartbeat without you even realizing it. So here's the thing, man, when you sit back and look at Zidane and Iniesta after everything we just broke down, the style, the big moments, the leadership, the legacy, the whole philosophy of what makes them who they are, you realize this isn't even about picking one guy over the other, it's about appreciating two different versions of genius that existed in the same game. Zidane was that guy who could give you a memory for life with one touch, one insane piece of magic that made the sport feel supernatural. And Iniesta was the guy who could make 90 minutes feel like poetry, like you were watching the game flow through one mind in total harmony. And honestly, trying to crown one of them as the real genius is missing the point, because the beauty is that football gave us both two completely different blueprints for greatness. And that's why debates like this are so damn fun, because they remind you why you fell in love with the sport in the first place. So yeah, whether you lean towards Zidane's fire or Iniesta's water, just know you're talking about legends who reshaped the game in ways we're still trying to wrap our heads around. And that's what makes it special. And hey, if you've been listening to this whole breakdown, thank you, seriously. I appreciate you being here. Keep chasing the stuff you love. Keep having these debates with passion. And good luck with whatever you're working on, whatever you're chasing in life, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, finding the beauty in the struggle, the genius in the grind. So thank you for hanging out. Much love and good luck out there, folks.